Okay, thank you for having us here. My name is Paul Barth. I'm with MarkLogic. Also with me is our Director of Consulting for the Central Region, Sean Mills. So he'll handle all the tough questions and I'll handle the easy questions. What I'm going to try to do today, and I know you've been doing a lot of hands-on work when it comes to Hadoop, setting up an environment, working in that. Today's a little bit of a NoSQL day. I'm going to talk a little bit more about NoSQL, and I know Sanjay's going to come back and talk more about Cassandra, which is another type of NoSQL database, but it's all part of this overall world of big data, because NoSQL is a very important component of that, and I think we'll talk through more of that. Can you guys hear me okay?
Plenty.
Plenty? Thanks, Rick. I really appreciate that.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, loud and clear. All right. Well, I'm a loud guy anyway, which my wife tends to tell me that on a regular basis. So, the other thing is, and I will share some links with you at the end of this presentation, we actually provide all of our training for free. It's all instructor-led on the web. You just sign up for it, put a credit card down to hold your spot. As long as you show up and take the class, there's no charge. So I felt like today is really going to be more of, let's just talk about NoSQL. We'll go down the path with more in-depth on MarkLogic, of course, but also share use cases and some case studies with you, as well as how does it work in a Hadoop environment. And that way, at least you get an understanding, and then I'll have some links for you after the fact. So, when you think about the database, and you think about, there's some gray hairs in the room, like myself, right? You think back to the mainframe world, and it was a paradigm shift. The mainframe was a paradigm shift going from mainframe to relational. Well, we really believe we're kind of getting to that point again. You're starting to get into a situation where the relational database wasn't made for all of this unstructured data that's hitting your environments. That's part of the challenge. And so if you think in that mindset of what we went through with the mainframe in the 70s, because somebody was telling me the other day, I think the relational database has been out now almost 40 years. And that's a long time when it comes to technology, if you think about it, right? So 40 years old, things are starting to shift. Now, the great thing is a relational database is really, really good, right, for square data. I'm sure most of you, wouldn't argue with any of these things. When your schema doesn't change, when, the data fits on one machine, it's good technology. It has been for years, and it will continue to be. And that's the one thing we're not trying to say. We're not trying to say, shutter your relational environment. That's not it at all, and I think the guys from Platform were mentioning the same thing, right? This is about standing up, taking control, ingesting or bringing together new disparate streams of data that you can't in a relational model, and that's where it starts to get a little difficult. So, let's talk real quickly, and I want to warn you, I will have a quiz at the end, and I have a couple of t-shirts to give away to just kind of keep everybody awake, right? So anybody that wants a t-shirt, just pay attention. So where did NoSQL even come from? Does anybody even know what NoSQL stands for? Not only SQL, right? Just to make sure. MarkLogic was actually founded in 2001. You had a stream of papers that hit by Google and Amazon where these terms and this idea started to get more and more popular. And then Eric Evans, who was in a meetup in Silicon Valley, decides to call the meetup NoSQL. And that's really where NoSQL started to get its girth, if you will, back in 2009. So there are really 4 different types of NoSQL databases. There's a graph database, which is about building relationships. There's a wide column database. There's a key value database. And there's a document database. MarkLogic fits underneath the document database. That doesn't mean it only can take documents. It just means that's the way it handles the data, and the fact that it structures it and trees the information hierarchically, not in rows and columns. I believe Cassandra is a key value store. They'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while to give you a better understanding of the differences. Neo4j is a graph database, and I can't think of any wide column databases that are NoSQL. No? Anybody? Okay. So anyway, that's just the 4 different types of NoSQL databases. So let's talk about MarkLogic for a second. And MarkLogic is the only enterprise NoSQL database on the market. We're not saying that. Gartner actually says that, right? I don't know how many of you actually subscribe or your company subscribe to Gartner Magic Quadrants. MarkLogic is actually in 3 different Magic Quadrants within Gartner. We are in a search Magic Quadrant, we are in the data warehousing Magic Quadrant, as well as the operational data store Magic Quadrant.
And we're, just to clarify, in the leaders quadrant of those Gartner reports.
So, just to give you an idea, right, MarkLogic is a 14-year-old company. So, it's been around the block. It was actually created by an enterprise search trained MIT engineer. His name is Chris Lindblad, who's still within MarkLogic. The goal, what he envisioned, he was the chief architect of InfoSeek. I don't know, anybody remember InfoSeek? Right, back in late 90s, 2000, right? One of the very first initial commercial search engines on the market. He envisioned the need and saw the need for an operational database integrated with the search engine, integrated with an application services layer. He wanted to be able to give commercial organizations and enterprises the ability to use text-like or Google-like searches on their data. Where do enterprises store data? They store it in their database, right? That was the mindset. And that's the thing that's a little unique, where MarkLogic is a little unique even in the NoSQL space, is because we actually have that integration of search, and it's all built on the same kernel, so very, very efficient, very fast to stand up applications. With that, MarkLogic allows you to do both search and queries within the same document. MarkLogic is ACID compliant. Those of you that are in the financial space, I'm sure that's got your ears perked up, right? ACID is very important when you're dealing with regulated data. We don't lose the data. It's got the enterprise features you would expect, that you come to expect from your relational model, right? The high availability, the disaster recovery, the replication. One thing I didn't mention, MarkLogic actually got its start in government. We do work for all the 3-letter intelligence agencies. We do work for the DoD, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Department of Homeland Security, healthcare.gov. Security is a big thing. We've passed plenty of security audits, so security is built into MarkLogic from the beginning. I know you've heard a lot of this today, which is great about the whole big data space. The scalability aspect is there, and the elasticity. So MarkLogic scales horizontally across commodity hardware, which is great when you want to spin up new nodes. You don't have to go buy new appliances. You put it on commodity hardware, and then you can pull it down very quickly, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. I'll touch more on how we work with Hadoop, but in a nutshell, we have a bi-directional connection with Hadoop, but I've got a couple of slides that I'll go into in more detail there for you. Another unique thing about MarkLogic, we are actually an RDF triple store. If any of you have thought about semantics or this theory of linked data, bringing data together and drawing relationships within your data, MarkLogic is an RDF triple store. It allows you to run native Sparkle queries. Sparkle is the language that you use to query triples, and that's a W3C standard. MarkLogic actually allows you to index and search on those triples. Okay, so that's kind of MarkLogic at a very high level. Let's talk about NoSQL and where some use cases are of interest that you might be able to apply. So if you think about it, and I think the guys from Plat4 were chatting, mentioning this as well, you know, when you're trying to bring various data structures together, and this could be your ERP environment, you could have PDF files and text files, you could have social media, whatever you wanted to bring together. right? And in this particular case, you're trying to bring that all together and you've got to build out the schema, right? And then the executives come along and say, hey, that's great. I like that information, but can you add this to it? So now you've gone along and not only you go through your normalization process, but you start building out more schema. And you're kind of, as we call it, schema hell, right? You're constantly updating the schema. Well, what if you could go down the path of bringing that data together in a NoSQL environment where you just ingest the data natively? Schema is important. We're not saying get rid of the schema, but you don't have to adapt the schema to get it into the system because it's not a relational database. This is the beauty of a NoSQL environment. It's not a relational database. So you're able to ingest the data natively. With MarkLogic, because it's the search element, we index that data immediately and then allow you to begin to get value out of that data much quicker. We can serve that information up to your BI tools, to your Tableaus and Cognoses and other items as well. A great example, we'll talk about the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, right, needed to build an emergency operations dashboard. They were trying to bring together data from their existing environments, so a lot of structured data, airline data, airport information, as well as weather data and social media. How many of you know that the first responder, everybody remember the U.S. air flight that landed on the Hudson? Right, the Miracle on the Hudson, the first responder of that was a tweet. That actually was one of the things that spurred this on. So for 12 months, they're trying to bring together a dashboard with all of those segments of data. They wanted to be able to know that if they've got a hurricane getting ready to hit Florida, and they've got 4 777s coming in from Europe, where do they put those planes, right? Does the Fort Lauderdale airport, A, is it far enough away? B, does it even have the fuel, right, in their supply chain in order to get those planes out of there if this hurricane adjusts? So think about it, very important data, or the ability to know that, gee, we just had a plane land on the Hudson River. We might want to get some emergency personnel over there. 12 months they tried in a relational model. Couldn't do it. Too painful. Think about it, right? Those of you that deal in relational databases. Too painful. Oh, yeah. Rick's raising his hand, or?
Well, I'll just chime in. I was just talking with someone in the kitchen here during break about some of the work I do with the Red Cross, and we actually have tools that monitor social media in real time for certain keywords,
right,
to be aware of certain events, because sometimes we will catch it on that tool long before the media or the first responders are getting the notifications. So
right,
the Red Cross is actually ahead of the game.
Woohoo!
So that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So with, and this is the power of NoSQL, right? 12 months trying to cram that into rows and columns, it doesn't work. With MarkLogic, we actually had the POC up in 2 weeks. We had a fully functional product in 6 months. That included the government purchasing process. So it allows you to begin to change the way you think about data. That's the beauty of NoSQL, right? You reimagine what you could do with your data. And that's kind of a thing that we talk about at MarkLogic. What if, right? Reimagine what you can do if you can start to bring these data sets together that you've never been able to have access to. And that's the beauty of this class, I think, right? Is learning more about not only the big data element, but just this whole unstructured data mess that's coming at us, right? How do you get handle on it? How do you begin to elevate that conversation with your executive teams, or whoever's driving the strategy within your organization, right? So that's data consolidation. What if you didn't want to necessarily bring all that data into the same place? Well, now you actually can do it in a metadata store. Gartner calls this a logical data warehouse. I don't know if any of you have read their white paper on this logical data warehouse theory, but it's all about instead of bringing the data together, indexing the data and understanding the metadata of the data, right, in your environment. I'll use Warner Brothers as a great example. Think about the amount of data that Warner Brothers has with the history of all their films, scripts, trailers, all that information stored in 5 separate locations on 5 different systems across their soundstage in LA, right? It would take their librarians weeks to go find the data when people were requesting the information. MarkLogic came in, began to index all of the metadata of that information, store it in MarkLogic. Now the librarians are able to search and do sub-second queries to understand what the need is, right? They built some middleware to pull it out and deliver it, but Warner Brothers has actually turned it on its head. Now that they understand what data they have, they've turned it into a revenue stream. They've now gone out and said, okay, Pepsi, Coca-Cola. I thought somebody was from CPG in here. Was there a PepsiCo guy? Yeah, right? You know, now they're coming to you guys from a marketing perspective to say, hey, I've got Marilyn Monroe drinking a Pepsi, right, in this particular film clip. Would you like that for your next marketing campaign? Right? It became a revenue stream. They always had it, but finding it and knowing really what they had. I mean, think about it. A lot of you are from really big companies. Who knows what kind of data is hidden in there, right? How many skeletons are in the closet? We won't go there. But anyway, but that's another great example of NoSQL, right? Being able to bring that data together and understand what you really have.
And the one other unique part about this is that you don't. It doesn't have to be multiple data stores and multiple Oracle databases or there's no consanguinity on the left side of this graph where everything has to be the same. You could have an Oracle database and a SQL, MySQL database and a Sybase database, and then your document store that you just pointed to sitting on Hadoop somewhere. Some of the information you can suck in, you can actually ingest directly into MarkLogic. Some of the other information, you simply do what Paul was talking about and index the metadata so you can have the pointers back to the data, to our system, or to really, when MarkLogic's doing the searching here, we don't care what the backend resource is, right? And it'll find, you run a query, it's actually going to search across all of those different facets and all of those different sources and present you with your query return that's easily accessible from, and I've got one customer right now, we're ingesting 87 data sources, and all of them are different. There's some of them we're bringing into MarkLogic, some of them we're using the metadata store concept for, but 87 separate data sources, and the queries are able to grab information from any of those. We're actually doing a semantics analysis on them as well to do inferencing on some of the data as well. So very, very robust tool to be able to get a handle on not just one system you have or one at a time, doing iterative searches, but doing joined searches across the entire pool of data.
So the last use case that I'll share with you is really more around what I would call information publishing. A lot of companies use MarkLogic and use NoSQL in the area of content management or digital asset management systems, right? Because once again, you're storing all of that data. We can store text, JSON, XML, binaries, right? Anything can be ingested in, and then because it's serving it like an XML environment, you can actually serve that information dynamically, right? Based on the device, based on the business logic associated with that request. So whether it's Citi, Mitchell 1, BBC, and I'll touch a little bit more about BBC when we talk about scale, but in a nutshell, we actually power all 150 of the BBC Sports websites. And it's all being done in a semantics relationship. So it's personalized data based on the information that's on the screen. They're serving up more data relative to that information on the screen. So you're giving that data even more knowledge and even more intelligence in order to deliver better results down the road. Okay? So those are 3 use cases. This is just a feature screen. Just, as I mentioned, 14 years in the making. MarkLogic comes with a lot of enterprise features out there. We can drill down on any of those if anybody's interested. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but just, like I said, there will be a test at the end. Just kidding. At least not on that part. So let's talk about MarkLogic and Hadoop, right? That's why you're here. Obviously, you've been spending a lot of time in Hadoop. So how does MarkLogic work, and how does NoSQL in general work when it comes to Hadoop? And I think what you'll find is we're probably a little more unique or a little different than, let's say, our friends at Cassandra, which you're going to learn more about in just a few minutes, right, on the next presentation. But at least it starts to give you an idea of how things work. I know the guys from Splunk, right, had a way to tie in. So with MarkLogic, I want to introduce you to what's called a tiered storage concept, which is the way, and I set this up for you so you can see how we begin to work with Hadoop. So in MarkLogic, this is kind of your typical typical cluster of MarkLogic. You have E nodes, which are your evaluator nodes. They manage all your user information coming in. And then you have D nodes, which is a data node, and it manages the partitions of the information. Now you see the little forests. MarkLogic, we call our partitions forests because we tree the information, right? Get it? Ching, ching. Right. Yeah, I know. It's bad. But anyway, so with tiered storage, what MarkLogic actually allows you to do is it allows you to begin to define the tiers of data based on attributes. And we use what's called a range index. I won't go into detail on that. But in a nutshell, we're allowing you to decide at what point in time is this data need to be moved over to a different tier. Let's use date for an example because it's easy, right? So you've got in your environment, you've got new data, let's call it up for 3 months old, and then anything after 3 months, you want to move it to a separate tier because maybe your SLA on that information is lower. Is less, right? So now what I've done is I've said, okay, in my tiers, I've got my blue forest, which is going to be my under 3 months old. I've got my yellow forest, which is the over 3 months old data, and I can tell MarkLogic to automatically move the information across and balance those when my new data turns old, right? And it's a constant, so it's an automated process. Now, what's unique about that is now I can move that entire tier to a different storage. So now I can keep my blue, because my SLA is much higher on an SSD environment, but I can move my yellow into a Hadoop cluster if you so choose, right? Or some other way, right? The beauty of Hadoop, and I'm sure what you guys have been talking about quite a bit is, it's today's tape, right? It's the cheap storage. That's where your first ROI is going to come from when you go to your execs to say, let's move some of this data down into Hadoop to save dough. And that's where it all comes from. So MarkLogic actually allows you, through this tiered storage, to begin to do that. And then you can come along and you can query not only the, let's say the information in Hadoop, or if the user so chooses, they can query the other database, or they can query both databases as well. So at the end of the day, right, whether you can use any combination of HDFS, SSD, SAN, however you want to work through that. Now, let's remember, you're only going to be as fast as your slowest tier, right? And that's where MarkLogic starts to come into more of a connector perspective, where you're moving information in and out. But, at the end of the day, because we sit natively on top of Hadoop, we allow you to run those MapReduce jobs within Hadoop, pulling information in from MarkLogic. And just to clarify, you don't have to have Hadoop, you don't have to have HDFS to be running MarkLogic. Okay? So I know in some cases there's a lot of tools that have been built out there where you need that. That is not the case with MarkLogic.
So if Hadoop and NoSQL have to coexist on the earlier picture, would it sit on the same nodes as Hadoop cluster, or would it be separate nodes for MarkLogic?
We can do. Did you hear that?
Can you read it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So in that previous slide where you
Go back.
talked about if Hadoop and NoSQL have to coexist, those nodes, would they sit on the Hadoop nodes already clustered if one is set up, or would it be separate from?
Okay, so
Wait. So the question was,
Yeah, good point.
sorry guys, the question was, if I'm going to if MarkLogic or a NoSQL environment is going to work with Hadoop, does it have to sit on the same node? Is that right? Okay.
right. So the answer first is you don't have to sit on Hadoop, right? So you were saying, if it has to sit on HDFS or it has to sit on a Hadoop cluster, one, it doesn't have to. You can have your storage on, or have your database pointing to any type of storage and any mixed type of storage, especially in this tiered storage architecture. If you are using this type of an architecture where you have, let's just say we're using SSD on our near-term data, and then we're migrating our archival data off to HDFS, off to Hadoop. It doesn't have to be on the same node. It can be anywhere in your cluster, as long as we have a pointer to it, right? And we're going to do automatic. MarkLogic is capable of doing automated rebalancing. If, for example, one of your nodes starts to get larger than another for whatever reason, we'll simply move those forests over to a different node because we know where everything is through the indexing, through the through the tiered storage intelligence. So,
I actually think this next slide will help. Let me just build it out.
Answer the question? Yes.
So isn't the point, to answer this question, the way that MarkLogic sees the node is totally separate from the way the Hadoop would see the node?
Right. So the easiest way to look at it.
It's not the same.
Exactly. The easiest way to look at it is that MarkLogic floats on top of Hadoop. We don't require Hadoop or require specific mappings within Hadoop.
It's two different nodes.
Right.
So it's like a magic carpet. No, I'm just kidding.
So
we float.
Hadoop does not own the NoSQL name.
Hadoop, yeah, no, I don't think they do, right?
It exists.
I just have, when I hear magic and data together, I always get nervous. The MarkLogic is just holding the metadata. Not necessarily
In some cases, MarkLogic's actually ingested the data, right? So if you're pointing to a relational database on the back end and you don't want to move all the data out, right? Yes, we can just do an ingest of the metadata of, let's just say, an Oracle cluster. And now we know where everything is within that Oracle cluster. All we have is metadata stored within MarkLogic. But we can also bring in, let's take your unstructured data type of an example. You bring in all that stuff that right now that you're throwing into Hadoop because you have nowhere else to put it and you don't know what to do with it. You can actually ingest that directly into MarkLogic, whether that node is on local storage or on a Hadoop node.
And we've had others where they'll bring it into MarkLogic, enrich the data, and then put it back in Hadoop. Right? So that's kind of that bidirectional connector that I was talking about, which we've got a little application called MarkLogic Content Pump that's just a high-speed pump to get information in and out of Hadoop, or just a way to ingest data very, very quickly. And that's giga, tera, and in some cases petabytes of data. So in this particular case, right, we were talking a little bit, going back to your question, is being able to run, kind of having this bidirectional connector, right? I can run MapReduce, I can have Hadoop pull down information out of the MarkLogic for us, run the MapReduce and then send it back, or vice versa, MarkLogic can pull information out of Hadoop and combine it with other data that's not stored in Hadoop. So it's almost like a bridge from that perspective as you go from your HDFS environment really up into your final application, especially when you're trying to bring other types of data sets together. Make sense? So for those of you that are Reese's Peanut Butter Cup fans, right, and our philosophy is we're all about making Hadoop better. So with Hadoop, you think about the offline analytics, the long haul batch. I mean, some of the things you guys have been talking about already. With MarkLogic, it's more about the real time and the distributed indexes. But at the end of the day, we envision it's all about the complementary aspects and bringing the two together in an enterprise environment. And that's really where the value of MarkLogic comes into play, whether it's in a Hadoop environment or not. It's being able to get applications stood up very, very quickly and get access to data that you normally can't get access to.
Can you talk a little bit about how the batch processing that happens on Hadoop, you then enable it to become real time in MarkLogic? How does that work?
So you're going to run, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? You're going to run your batch jobs. Let's say you've got some batch analytics that you're going to run inside of Hadoop, so a MapReduce. You're going to take the information that comes from that and serve it to MarkLogic, right? It's then maybe going to combine that with other data sets and then serve that. Now, you're only as fast as that MapReduce. So if you've got to run, if it's more of a real-time element, you really can't put it in an HDFS environment, right? That data shouldn't be there if you need it for this other, this type of SLA. Yeah? Okay. So let's talk just a few minutes about case studies, just to give you an idea where NoSQL is a great fit and some other elements. So I mentioned the BBC earlier. Don't ever let anybody tell you NoSQL doesn't scale. Okay? MarkLogic actually was the video driver, or actually the content driver in the 2012 and 2014 Summer Olympics. For those of you that probably don't remember the 2012 Summer Olympics, sorry, the 2014 Winter Olympics. The 2012 Summer Olympics was actually in London, right? BBC's hometown. They won